Attention CDL drivers in Tuscarawas County. Kimball wants you to join their team. Kimball helps keep Tuscarawas County looking beautiful with their waste disposal and recycling services, and they're always looking for quality workers. Enjoy fantastic benefits, incentive pay, industry-leading wages, and be home with your family every night. Kimball is committed to keeping Eastern Ohio clean. After all, they live here too. Apply today at kimballcompanies.com/careers. Kimball, recycling and disposal done right.
Welcome to Talkin Trash, where we try to answer all your questions about recycling and proper waste disposal in Tuscarawas County. I'm your host, Hannah Hartman. Joining me is my go-to expert on all things recycling here in Tuscarawas County, my sister, Rachel Rodocker. Hi, Rachel.
Hi.
Rachel is a passionate advocate for recycling and sustainable practices, and she has worked in our local recycling industry for several years. So her behind-the-scenes knowledge about how to recycle properly in Tuscarawas County is vast. And it is what will guide our ongoing discussions here on the Talkin Trash podcast. This episode is being recorded on June 18th, 2024, and because rules and regulations change over time, some of what we discussed may have changed by the time you hear this, but with that caveat, Rachel, let's dumpster dive into this discussion. All right. We're getting tired of that yet? Nah, that's a good one. Okay. We always like to start each episode, because people don't always listen to podcasts or hear them in the correct order. We always want to start with the basics of what is recyclable here in Tuscarawas County. Just a quick rundown, Rachel.
Yep. I do my high five for the 5 categories of recyclable items, which was paper, cardboard, plastic bottles and jugs, glass bottles and jars, and metal cans.
Okay, and if you want a more in-depth discussion of that, you can start with episode 1. Right. But here we are, what we'd like to start doing, if we have something that we want to touch on from the last episode that triggered a thought that we wanted to bring up in the next episode, we're going to do a follow-up from our previous episode. We had mentioned the packaging that you tend to receive when you order something from Amazon.
Yes.
And you wanted to readdress that with a positive spin this time.
Yes, I felt kind of guilty, like I demonized them. And I will say, I know that they're not doing everything wrong, but I wanted to go and look and see what I thought they were doing right. So something I wanted to point out, because I don't get from Amazon too often. Often I like to shop local when I can. However, sometimes I just need to work something quick. I have the free 2-day shipping. So I noticed I started getting a lot more of these types of bags, which for people listening and not watching, it's a paper mailer, but it almost feels like a bubble interior, but it is actually all made of paper. Okay. So what I used to get from Amazon was called a mixed material mailer, which essentially was like a paper outside, then bubble wrap inside.
Plastic, yeah.
And that's not recyclable.
Right.
So I was encouraged to see this paper mailer, and it made me want to go right on the bag. I think it says, to find out more about this bag, learn more at amazon.com/this mailer. So I went there out of curiosity and found out that they have now, that 99% of the mixed material mailers, so what they used to use, have been replaced with these recyclable paper alternative. Yeah, a high number. So that is a step in the right direction. And then kind of similarly, you can read, they had a whole waste study or a comprehensive sustainability report once you started digging a little deeper on the website that showed the different initiatives, like the steps they've taken to try to be greener, because they do recognize their part in the extra waste that's generated. But another stat I thought was interesting was about how they've reduced the per shipment packaging. So maybe think like stuff within your individual boxes. They say they've reduced it by 41% since 2015.
So you're talking like packing peanuts kind of?
Yeah, and the packaging materials within.
Packaging within packaging.
Yes. Okay. So that's been reduced as well. So again, I don't want to focus too much on Amazon. We have a lot of local places we could go for stuff, but
that was going to be my suggestion was, I'm always the type of person, if I can find something at a local business, that is where I'm going to get it. Obviously convenience is a factor for a lot of people, but hey, to avoid all that not plastic, but just all that packaging, get your reusable shopping bag, go to a local business, and then you don't need any of it. But no, that's a good follow-up though, and it's positive and encouraging. Yes. So I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back. back to what would normally be our first segment, which is where does it go? And this time we want to focus on paper. That's going to be our topic this episode. So where does paper go?
Well, and I will say some of this might sound like repetitive because it's kind of a similar process to cardboard because they're both fiber, paper products. But I did want to restate kind of the general steps that are taken with paper
in case somebody missed our
in case someone missed it, and just to reiterate. So once you put, let's say, an envelope or something like that into your curbside bin or at one of the public drop-off sites, it will get picked up by a truck. It'll go to the MRF. We talk about that every episode, the material recovery facility. At the material recovery facility, it'll be separated out from all the other recyclables. In fact, I think it's one of the earlier steps, one of the first steps in the process is that because of the lightweight nature of paper, it gets kind of diverted.
Is that the part of the MRF that uses puffs of air?
No, that's the plastics, actually. This one, they use big, I call them combines, like these rolling combines. That kind of separate stuff by weight a little bit, though, so the lighter paper goes up.
Okay.
Regardless, it gets separated out, and then once it's all clean material, it gets baled. It gets sent to a paper mill, where it is then shredded, and it gets set into, they say, a pulping machine. That's pretty much what it's called, which is where they use water and or chemicals to break down into the individual fibers, and then this is also the point in the process where if there were contaminants, I'll call them, on the paper. Let's say that envelope had a window on it.
Oh, yeah.
That's not necessarily, you don't need to rip those all off because at this point in the process is when any ink, tape, labels will get removed out in this big pulping machine.
That's another point that we mentioned in the cardboard episode, but I like to reiterate that because for a while I was unclear. Of course, you helped clarify for me, but I was unclear if, an envelope, paper envelope with a plastic window so you can see the address and whatever. I was unclear. Can that be recycled? But it can because at this point in the process, that stuff gets filtered out.
Yeah, and then after everything is filtered out and the fibers start bonding again, they get rolled and dried and then sent off to become new products. So that's kind of the quick version. You can obviously talk more in depth about all the steps. Once it is separated, though, and we talk about it in terms of different paper grades. So there were 5 main types of paper grades. The first one is what we talked about in the prior episode, which is the old corrugated containers. And what you think of as cardboard, which really is cardboard essentially is craft paper, 2 layers of brown craft paper, and then they had the zigzag for the durability in between. So that's one paper grade. There's also mixed paper. That's a general grade. Old newspaper, so think about newsprint and the type of paper that is thinner.
Yeah.
Then there is what they call high-grade de-inked paper, which would be like your letterhead, copy paper, envelopes, things like that. And then what they deem pulp substitutes, which is any like shavings or clippings from the paper mills and from print shops, more of an industrial byproduct, really. But generally, they're separated into what they can be used for again. So,
interesting. So, did we cover everything? Steps at the mill, fibers. Did you want to talk any more about either of those things?
Well, I can touch on it. I can touch on the fibers because I know it plays a part in something else we're gonna.
Oh, sure.
We're gonna discuss too. But I do want people to know that paper can be reused. It's a very recyclable item, and it does get recycled a lot. It can be reused 5 to 7 times before the fibers really start to become too short and weak to be used again.
Okay.
But I like to think about the fibers because it's fascinating to think. They call it downcycling. So if you're recycling something, and it's something that is going to lose quality every time it takes a step down, essentially. So I have a graphic here. What I wish I could show it on the screen, but I'll describe it. So it says that maybe the first paper you're in contact with is quality writing paper.
Okay.
And then you recycle it.
Yeah.
The next thing it might become is photocopying paper. So like it'll be mixed in. The next one would be cardboard for packaging a box. They'll make it into that craft paper, right? Because that's it's not quite as strong paper. And then the last one would be maybe tissue paper or toilet paper, which are clearly thinner and more rippable.
I gotcha.
So think about ripping it and how easily it rips. And
yeah, so you're kind of like, essentially like the thickness of the paper.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yes.
Like,
It's the durability,
Yeah.
the thickness.
yeah, in my head, I would have thought cardboard would have been further up, but you're kind of talking about like that top layer and that bottom layer.
Yes.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and with each, you have to think too about which things can be made of recycled paper. So one of the examples, like if it's something that's going to come into contact with food, it's going to come from virgin paper. It's not going to virgin fiber. It's not going to come from recycled because they need it to be, pristine paper. Or similarly, newspaper ink. Not all inks are the same. Some inks you don't want to come in contact with food. So but these are all things that kind of play a part in the overall process.
Very interesting. Well, you just mentioned this, which it takes us into our next segment, common questions.
Yeah.
I want to talk about food paper for a second, because that's another thing. Sometimes I'll get some food to go from a restaurant, and maybe it's in like a paper to go container. And I think that's great. And then like on the bottom of it, there's a little kind of piece of paper, and maybe I have a sandwich on top of there. And when I take that sandwich out, it's kind of like it's clean. There's no grease, there's no sauce, there's no cheese. It's just like a piece of paper. And I always think, should I throw this away or should I recycle this? So what do you know?
I will say that, it varies based on where it's coming from. For the research for this podcast, I wanted to use some big name fast food companies. I won't even name them now. You don't need to know. But I picked a couple I go to. And I wanted to find out if they consider their food wrappers recyclable. And most of the ones I found said they really don't. And the reason was because the same way they have some kind of coating in the paper, even if you can't just see it with the naked eye, right? And they said the same waxy coating or plastic coating that's built into the paper that makes it resistant to grease. Yeah. So think about a greasy hamburger is what would make it gum up the machinery during the pulping process, because there's some kind of wax or plastic, which you don't want in the paper. So even though they look just like paper, like a thin wax paper, there's probably more to them, and I would advise against recycling them for that reason. Okay. Now, if you truly do have like a really pretty, sometimes it looks like a checkered pattern and nothing got on it. I have reused them. I think it sounds silly.
Reuse it, but maybe not recycle it. It makes sense, like what you're saying. I'm not going to put a piece of like toilet paper on the bottom, like unused, of course, toilet paper under food, because it's not going to do anything. It's not going to prevent, grease or whatever. And that's the whole point of that piece of paper, is to prevent more grease from soaking through whatever. So even if you can't tell it's a little waxy or whatever it's doing, it probably serving that purpose. So,
or at least I would think that if it truly were recyclable, those companies will be shouting that from the rooftop to get attention, and I couldn't find much. So I guess I challenged our go and do some
correct us if we're wrong.
The few I looked into didn't claim they really were, so I'm thinking they're
okay. Well, from now on, I'll just throw that food paper in the trash unless it's pretty and not covered in cheese grease. So it's okay. Another common question, and I think a lot of people might agree that they have had this thought if they are somebody who recycles: should you put shredded paper into your curbside recycling bin? Paper is recyclable. It doesn't really matter what size it is.
Well, that is a great question. And it actually goes back a little bit to what I was talking about with the fibers and the length of fiber, and that impacts how recyclable it is. So once you shred it, obviously it's going to shorten some of the fiber, so that will make it less than ideal. And there are other reasons why you don't want to put shredded paper into the bin as well. It can be a litter issue. The paper is going to blow around. It's light and not condensed. The reason you shredded it might be sensitive information, so you don't really want that floating around where people might be trying to get it and literally glue it back together to get
When's that?
There's a lot of reasons. I would say that shredded paper, while they don't really want it in the curbside bins or at the drop-off sites, depending on what kind of ink was used and stuff, you can use it for composting. It's actually great for composting because it's already cut down into smaller bits. So we generally ask you for no shredded paper.
Okay, so just throw that shredded paper in the trash. Or compost. Okay. Well, that's going to take us into our dumpster diving section. So I found a couple things in the dumpster, in the recycling dumpster that, should not be in there. Let's start this. But to me, this is an obvious one, but, there's people out there who might not be clear. So I've got a Styrofoam to-go container, a food container.
Yes. Well, there's numerous things going on here. One, let's see if there's a symbol on. Even though you don't always want to look at the symbol, it tells a story. So this is a number 6. So that's low. That's telling me it's a kind of plastic, and it is. Any styrofoam is, kind of plastic. But the problem with trying to recycle styrofoam is it's lightweight. You have to condense it and pelletize it to make it usable again. It often is food contaminated, and I've read that it can't be heated to the point of taking off the food and bacteria. Like, it can't really be disinfected again. So once it's touched food or something, like, it might be the difference between a big block of packaging cardboard and like a takeout container. But you really can't kill it in order to make it another food container again, because it's not heated the same way as other plastic. So yeah, locally. Now, again, it can be recycled. It is a recyclable product, but locally they do not want it. There's no market for it. But yeah, the lightweight nature makes it more of a litter concern, kind of like the shredded paper.
So that's just another opportunity to emphasize why we're doing this podcast.
Yeah.
We are specifically talking about the rules and regulations in Tuscarawas County. So yeah, that number 6, I think you said, recycle symbol, maybe somewhere it can actually be recycled, but if you're trying to do things right here in Tuscarawas County, put your styrofoam takeout container in the trash.
Yes, and to avoid it in the first place if you can, which could mean, it sounds lame, but I've done it. And yeah, you get looks. You can take your own container if you want, or you could share your food with other people.
That goes back to our car kit that we talked about, and that's so horrible. Yes. Okay. And then this is sort of along the same lines. It's another type of takeout container. I know, we were talking about paper in this episode, but dumpster diving kind of goes its own direction because it depends on what I find in there. So this is an aluminum takeout container. I don't know what was in it, but it looks pretty clean. It does. But typically it would have a clear plastic lid on it. So I'm mostly describing this for people who aren't watching the video of the podcast. So yay, nay, well...
To me, it's more complicated, I guess. They would say the rule of thumb is to put only metal cans in.
Oh, right.
Okay. And they don't really want aluminum foil itself in because it rips easily and get lost in the process. However, I read a tip, and I've been doing this, so I guess I'll share it with the listeners because I'm assuming anyone listening is a pretty die-hard recycler or interested in it, is that if you do have a more rigid piece of aluminum, look, you can see that. If you have a more rigid piece and it's not contaminated, so... If you have one of those huge rectangular ones that a lasagna or something was in,
like a catering,
not worth it. But this one, clearly, either there was nothing in it, or, it's pretty clean. I've read that if you have one, it's the right size, and you can literally crumble it into roughly the size and shape of a can. It is much more likely to make it through the recycling process. It's like, let me see, you have a can of LaCroix. I didn't do it quite right, but,
bad though.
Because the problem is, the issue is similar to what I was describing with styrofoam, is it is recyclable. It can be recycled. Locally, their issue is they want to make sure to send only things that the MUF is designed to sort out to the MRFs, because then it'll make it through the process. So I just read this cheat and thought it was pretty smart.
So basically, it is recyclable, but only if you put it in the shape fashion like it and make it through. Because otherwise, it's probably not going to make it through the process, in which case you might as well just throw it in the trash.
Yes, and as long as it's clean. And yes, vocabulary rules.
That's what I... Okay. Well, then that's going to take us into our What's the Word section. And we wanted to talk about the word biodegradable, which, as we were prepping for this episode, I know what it means, but like to hear the definition kind of, and we'll get into what makes biodegradable different from compostable.
Yeah.
Go ahead and do the definition of biodegradable.
Sure. And this is, again, because it's kind of relevant to paper, that's biodegradable, but
yeah.
Essentially the definition I found, this technical definition, was it's capable of being decomposed by bacteria or other living organisms.
Okay.
And that is, and it breaks down into organic matter.
Okay.
So... conversely, think of plastic.
Yeah.
That's breaking down into microplastics. That's not going to break into biomass, into water, into CO2, into things that can be released kind of back into the environment without harming the ocean. So that's a general definition for biodegradable. However, I will say there's a caveat to it, because in my mind, I've always been in the opinion, I'd rather, like a fast food cup that's plastic, I'd rather get a paper cup, because at least paper is biodegradable. However, if I throw that paper cup away, then you kind of remove some of what makes it attractive as biodegradable, because once it goes into a landfill, it's not exposed to the sun. It's not exposed to air.
And those are necessary for the biodegradation.
Yeah. So, for example, I've actually thought of this example on our drive over here, because we talked about this earlier today, is they can pull out newspapers from landfills that are from the early 1900s and still read them, because they don't break down in the landfill, because writing is a necessary components to break it down.
You're taking me back to the first time. I wish I could remember what it was that I put into my trash can. And I said, well, at least it'll break down. And you said, actually, it won't if it's going to a landfill. And I went, what? But, wow. And that's why. There's no light. There's
very slowly. But the other, very slowly. The other part of it is, once it's in the landfill, let's say it does break down, but without the presence of oxygen, which would accelerate the breakdown, it will produce methane gas, which is 25 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon.
Oh my God.
So you're trying to avoid the landfill, I guess is my point.
Yeah, because now, like, in my thought process, well, okay, if this is, and again, I don't remember what it was, so if it was something I could have composted or recycled, like I didn't for some reason, but in my head thinking, well, if it is, it'll break. In fact, it has quite the opposite effect, where it could actually create methane instead.
Yeah. There's no winning with waste.
There's no winning with waste.
So reducing and not using it in the first place is the best, but you gotta produce waste.
Well, and then can you describe the difference between biodegradable and compostable?
Yes. You would think of them as interchangeable, but I saw this written and I thought it was interesting. It said that all compostable products are biodegradable. So that's interesting, but not the reverse section. The difference essentially being that even though biodegradable things could break down in the right environment, a normal industrial composting facility, they have certain lengths of time that they will compost, that they will rotate the compost and give it the air and the water and everything it needs to break into a usable compost product. Mm-hmm. And most things that are biodegradable won't break down in that amount of time.
No.
So eventually they might break down, but also what they break down into is different too. Because if you think about compostable, you definitely think about more like food waste, yard waste, things that are organic like that. Mm-hmm. But a biodegradable piece of paper, yes, it could eventually, compost. It just depends on the facility. You see a lot of products nowadays that say, oh, they're probably 100% compostable at an industrial composting facility, not in your own compost pile.
Oh, and you'll know it too if you're trying to do the whole composting. I've got one of those like rotating barrels, and we throw food scraps and all that kind of stuff in there. But yeah, and there are food scraps that take longer to biodegrade. Orange peels come to mind, and eggshell. But yeah, something back in the day when I was still throwing all these things that are supposed to be compostable, no, you're just spreading trash. Essentially. Okay. Well, that'll then take us to our simple solutions section. So since we're on the theme of paper, yes, let's talk about junk mail. And
yes, this is another one of the examples of how you can reduce. How many times have you gotten something in the mail that you immediately get rid of?
Oh, every day. Yeah,
every day. So my simple solution is to unsubscribe to anything you can, to try to be mindful when you're ordering things about unchecking the box that says you want to unsubscribe.
Okay, so you just said, but I guess what confuses me is sometimes you know how I ended up on this list, so I don't know how to unsubscribe from.
Well, yeah, and certain things you can't unsubscribe from, but I will say that if there's like direct marketing that you receive, and that's just they get lists, you didn't sign up for it, you can buy lists and when sent to them. So if you go to DMA Choice, and it's Direct Marketing Association, there is a small fee to do it. It's $5 for 10 years to unsubscribe. But it is what the United States Postal Service recommends if you're trying to get off of some of these. So you can unsubscribe essentially from a lot of these national advertisers, things like that. There's another one called optoutprescreen.com, which is pre-screenings for credits. You could opt out of those. There's one called catalogchoice.org where you can opt out of if you get catalogs. It helps weed those out. And the last point I made about was, again, just being selective what you sign up for. Like if you see a free, sign up to win a prize, a raffle, whatever, or on the backs of surveys, they often come with the caveat that you're automatically signed up for something. So be selective with what you sign up for, or if they're, again, the option to uncheck a box when you sign
for
up.
it if you think about it.
Yeah. So those are our tips.
And along this, like, kind of a similar line of thinking, choose the go paperless option for your bills. That's an easy one, I guess.
Yeah, if you have that choice.
I even noticed they can be a little relentless about that, because I don't think they want to send you a paper bill if they have to. Yeah, so that's a pretty easy option.
Yeah.
This one is kind of on its own, but I somehow come across this way more often than I think I should. So you know how, like, the very last square of toilet paper on a roll is, like, glued on, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's the only one that is, like,
unusable. Yeah.
And maybe only half of it is usable, but point being, up to that square, every single square is usable. But I come across the mostly or partially used rolls of toilet paper in, like, shared restrooms at places where, like, somebody took it off the roll to put a new roll on, but because it wasn't empty, they don't throw it away, so it sits there, but then, like, nobody uses it. So I don't totally understand the thought process. So there's that. So the simple solution is just use it to the end of the roll and then recycle that last little square and the cardboard thing. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. That's kind of my own thing, but it's just kind of drives me crazy, because I don't understand what are we doing here? Like, if you're not throwing it away, why are you replacing it at all? So maybe they think they're doing something right. So I can understand, like, if you're afraid that you're going to run out because it's getting low, you could put, like, a full roll nearby. Get that. Totally get that. That's not exactly what it's happening. So anyway, just use up those fantasies and risk the actual end case, and everything could be very recyclable. Okay. And that's going to take us to our last segment, the good news. And Rachel, for anybody who is listening, not watching the podcast, they can't see that you are wearing your sunglasses. It's bright in this podcast studio, but the future is so bright, you got to wear shades, because a lot of paper products could be diverted from the landfill.
Yes. In fact, the study, I've referred to this study before in this podcast, so if you're following along, you've heard this name, but the State of Ohio Waste Characterization Study, this was actually many years ago, but they project that the numbers are similar. But whenever they were looking at the statewide distribution of the major components that were landfill, 41% total was paper fiber. So that was cardboard and paper. Anything that was fiber was what was thrown away, and paper is recyclable. So theoretically, other than contamination, which is all going to get contaminated once it goes in the trash, but whenever you started with it, at least theoretically, a lot of that could be diverted.
Yeah,
so that's the good news.
The good news, like, it's kind of like bad news that could be good news, but even still, it kind of just hits on that point of, if you as the consumer take a little extra care, a little extra step here and there just to recycle what you can, then you are helping to divert all of that from the landfill, where it will not be recycled, it won't break down, and all of that kind of stuff.
It'll produce methane gas.
Really bad stuff. So basically, a huge percentage of what we're putting in landfills doesn't need to be in there, and we should, I think, as a society, work harder to try to reduce that amount, right?
Given who our sponsor is of this show, I will say that we're not demonizing landfills. They are an important part of the process. Absolutely. It's just that they should be the last thing that happens.
Right. Yes. So anyway. Okay. Anything else you want to share before we wrap this up?
No, I think that was a good one on paper.
Well, that is going to do it for this episode. We hope that we've offered a little more clarity about how to recycle properly in Tuscarawas County, but if you have questions that you'd like us to address on the podcast, you can email them to WJER@WJER.com, and we'll do our very best to get answers and offer explanations to help you understand the process better, because when we know better, we do better. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk more trash on the next episode of Talkin Trash.